Hello, in this lesson, we are going to be looking at structural features and using them in your own writing. So, the session objectives for today are that we're going to understand structural features and how they shape meaning in text. We're also going to learn to identify and analyze key structural features made by writers and explore how to apply structural features to improve your own writing. So, welcome to this session, where, as I said, we're exploring how structural features impact meaning in literature and how you can apply these techniques to your own writing. So by the end of the lesson, you'll be able to identify key structural features, explain their effect on the reader, that's really, really important, and experiment with these techniques within your own work, because that is also really important for the creative writing. So, what are structural features, you might be asking? Hopefully, you know, but don't worry if you don't, because it is confusing and students do get these muddled up with language features. The structural features are the ways in which a writer organizes their text to create meaning or evoke specific responses from the reader and essentially move the action of the piece forward. And structural features can include foreshadowing, so hinting at future events, juxtaposition, so placing two contrasting ideas side by side, pacing, so the speed at which the narrative moves. They can also include a shift in focus, so changing the perspective or focus within the text. You see this a lot in film and TV, but when a writer or a director changes from one focus to the other, one storyline to the other, to keep the reader or viewer hooked. And a cyclical structure, so ending where the story began, or where the text feels like it hasn't really made much progress, and we're left sort of with questions about the sort of the reality of what has been going on. So, for example, in Of Mice and Men, the story begins and ends in the same place, and it's almost as if nothing has happened, and that's a deliberate structural ploy by Steinbeck to reflect on the futility of existence at the time and during the 1930s depression, and how men, sort of migrant workers, itinerant workers, felt at the time that their existence seemed almost pointless. And that structural device reflects that. So, as an example, in Macbeth, Shakespeare uses foreshadowing when the witches predict that Macbeth will become king. This tension, this creates tension as the audience waits to see how the prophecy will come true. And as a grade 8 or grade 9 tip, always think about how the structure creates tension or emphasizes the key themes, and always link structural choices to the writer's overall message. I know I mentioned this time and again, but it is so important. So next we have the importance of structure. So structure is often overlooked by students, particularly in the literature text. Students do tend to talk about it more for poetry, because as teachers we kind of drum it into you've got to talk about language, structure and form, but that is equally important for the literature text themselves, and it plays a crucial role in shaping the reader's experience. So the order of events, for example, that can be really, really key and something for you to think about. The way in which information is revealed, think about an inspector calls, and how the story is revealed bit by bit throughout the play, and the overall layout of a text can impact how we interpret its meaning. So as an example, in an inspector calls, Priestley uses a cyclical structure. I mentioned this earlier with Of Mice and Men, but Priestley uses this too by having the play end in a similar way to how it began, with the arrival of a second phone call from a different inspector. This reinforces the theme of moral responsibility and highlights the character's failure to learn from their mistakes. And as a grade 8 or grade 9 tip, always consider how the structure of the text helps convey the writer's intentions. So ask yourself, why did the writer choose to structure the text in this way? And you're going to hear me keep going on about this, because it is so important to talk about the writer. Things don't happen by accident, and it's our job to analyze those things. So key structural features, so to give you some further ones in a little bit more detail. So foreshadowing, writers use this technique to hint at future events or outcomes, creating suspense and preparing the reader for what's to come. So juxtapositions are placing two contrasting ideas, scenes or characters side by side to highlight differences or to create tension. And an example of foreshadowings, they're two of the key ones that we want to be looking for within text. But in Macbeth, the witch's prophecy that none of women born shall harm Macbeth foreshadows his downfall, as this cryptic message sets the stage for his eventual death at the hands of Macduff, who was from his mother's womb untimely ripped. And as an example of juxtaposition, in A Christmas Carol, Dickens juxtaposes Scrooge's miserly, cold nature with the warmth and generosity of the Cratchit family highlighting the moral lesson of the stories. They're two key structural features that you can easily comment on. And as a grade 8 or 9 tip, look for moments where the writer uses juxtaposition to create contrast. How does this help emphasize a particular theme or build tension? Now, we can also think about pacing and narrative structure. So, I mentioned this earlier, but pacing refers to the speed at which the story unfolds, and writers manipulate pacing to build tension or to create emotional impact. And the narrative structure as well. So, this includes how the story is organized. For example, a linear timeline versus a non linear one, or flashbacks and flash forwards. And as an example of narrative structure in Frankenstein, Mary Shelley uses a framed narrative where the story is told within multiple layers of narration: Walton's letters, Victor's story, and the creature's perspective. And this structure allows Shelley to present multiple viewpoints and explore complex moral issues. And as an example of pacing, in Macbeth, the pacing quickens in the final act as Macbeth's downfall accelerates. This change in pace mirrors his increasing desperation and the chaos surrounding his rule. And as a grade 8 or 9 tip, pay attention to how the pacing of a scene affects the mood or the tone. Fast-paced scenes often build tension, while slower scenes allow for reflection or emotional depth. And you may want to pay attention to the way that Shakespeare uses multiple scenes far more than any other act of the play in Act 5 of Macbeth. So in this act, there are 9 scenes, depending on which version of the text you look at, but obviously some versions group together a couple of the last scenes. But let's say there's 9 scenes in the final act of Macbeth, even if we think about 8 scenes, far more than any other act of Macbeth. And this has been deliberately done by Shakespeare, a deliberate structural selection and structural device within the play in order to shift perspectives between different events that are occurring simultaneously, and shift the sort of the focus of different events that are taking place simultaneously. So we have Malcolm and the sort of the English resistance marching towards Dunsinane Castle, and we also have Macbeth in his castle, kind of like filled with paranoia and overwhelmed, but also determined. And we've got Lady Macbeth in there. We've also got the Lords in there, the Thanes in there, discussing their perspective on the event. So we've got these multiple storylines running alongside each other, and this is a structural feature. And then, so we can have focus shifts and cyclical structure. I've just mentioned this, but shifts in focus, just to reinforce this, occur when a writer moves from one perspective, setting, or idea to another, often creating contrast or revealing new information. And the cyclical structure, which I did mention earlier, occurs when a text ends in a similar way to how it began, creating a sense of closure or reinforcing key themes. We're just going over these to make sure that you really have them in your brains, because they can also be used in your own writing, as we're going to discuss shortly. So as an example of a shift in focus in Inspector Calls, I know I've given you one from Beth already, but for an Inspector Calls, Priestley frequently shifts the focus from one character to another during the interrogation, gradually revealing each character's role in Eva Smith's downfall. And this keeps the audience engaged and emphasises the theme of shared responsibility. An example of cyclical structure, I mentioned this already, but in Of Mice and Men, Steinbeck uses that cyclical structure, starting with the ending, starting and ending the novella at the same location, the riverbank. And this structure symbolises the unchanging fate of the characters and the inevitability of their tragic ending. And as a grade 8 or 9 tip, when discussing structural shifts in focus, consider how these shifts reveal different aspects of characters or themes. Why does the writer choose to change the focus at a particular moment, often leaving things on a cliffhanger? And a great way to revise this is by watching television, where there are multiple storylines running concurrently, because you will see the director leaving certain storylines on cliffhangers. So as viewers, we're thinking, what? We want to know what's happened there. But they've shifted to another focus, and so we stay watching because we want to find out what's happening with another storyline or character. So using these structural features in your own writing, so you can apply many of the structural features you analyse in literature in your own writing, particularly in creative or narrative tasks. So experiment with techniques such as foreshadowing, shifts in focus, or a cyclical structure to add depth and complexity to your writing. So as an example, when writing a story, you could use foreshadowing to hint at a character's eventual downfall, adding tension and keeping the reader engaged. And as an example, in descriptive writing, you could use juxtaposition to contrast two settings or characters, creating vivid imagery. And as a grade 8 or 9 tip, use structural tip features deliberately in your writing. Plan ahead to ensure that the structure supports the theme or message that you want to convey. And analysing structural features. So it's really important that we analyse these too in literature. So in Macbeth, Shakespeare uses a rapid change in pacing during Act 5 to heighten the sense of chaos surrounding Macbeth's downfall. As the witch's prophecies begin to unravel, the scenes become shorter and more fragmented, so as I mentioned earlier, reflecting Macbeth's increasing desperation. The shift in pacing mirrors the unravelling of his power and sanity, reinforcing the play's central theme of the corrupting influence of ambition. Furthermore, the use of foreshadowing, such as the prophecy, none of woman born shall harm Macbeth, builds tension throughout the play as the audience awaits the moment when Macbeth's fate is sealed. And as a grade 8 or grade 9 tip, always link your analysis of structure back to the writer's intentions. How does the structure enhance the themes or message of the text? So some common pitfalls that we can look at now. So only focusing on language. Remember, structure is just as important as language in shaping meaning and can really make you stand out in your writing, in your essays, because examiners will see many, many essays that talk about language, but far fewer essays that talk about structure. And describing structure without analysis. So don't just identify structural features, explain how they contribute to the writer's overall message or theme. And overlooking the impact on the reader, always consider how structural choices influence the reader's experience and understanding of the text. And as a grade 8 or 9 tip, when analysing structure, ask yourself, what effect does this have on the reader? How does it shape our understanding of the characters or themes? So just some final thoughts then. So structure plays a crucial role in shaping the meaning of a text. Always consider the writer's structural choices and how they contribute to the themes or messages, and pay close attention to pacing, shifts in focus, and how the text is organised. And these features often reveal key insights into the writer's intentions, and it's your job to unpick those. So that brings us to the end of this lesson. If you have found it useful, be sure to check out the other free sessions and check out the website as well, where there are many, many resources and lessons to help you, hundreds of resources and lessons to help you prepare for those exams. And don't forget to follow us on social media as well.